You were taught to fear the Viking axe. That was already a lie. The real weapon was quieter, longer, and waiting before the fight began. And once it did, fear had nowhere left to go. The sound you expect is the axe. Heavy, obvious, easy to picture. But that sound is already a lie. The first thing a Viking reached for was not the weapon you were taught to fear. It was something longer, quieter, already waiting. The spear was everywhere, in farms, in graves, in hands that did not look like warriors at all. It was cheap to make and easy to learn, which is exactly why it mattered. A wall of spear points does not shout. It does not rush. It waits. And waiting is what broke people. Most men did not own swords. They owned reach. They owned distance. A spear could end a fight before it began, before courage had time to form. It did not need strength. It needed discipline. And discipline is harder to resist than force. But this wasn't the worst part. The spear was not just a tool. It was a symbol. Odin's weapon. A reminder that power could strike from farther away than you expected. When a spear was planted upright in the ground, it marked territory. When it was thrown over an enemy line, it marked fate. You were already counted. And this is where the story turns. Because the Vikings did not believe weapons were neutral. A blade had memory. A shaft had loyalty. A weapon that worked once was trusted again, even if it failed others. Names were given, not to boast, to bind. The sword was rare, painfully rare. It took time, skill, and imported steel. To own one was to inherit debt, or blood, or both. These swords were not wide or crude. They were balanced, meant to move, meant to last, and they were passed down like secrets. When a sword entered a room, it changed the air. Not because it promised violence, but because it promised judgment. A sword said you were not meant to survive chance. You were meant to be chosen. But even here, the myth collapses. Most swords you imagine were not swung wildly. They were used carefully, measured, almost restrained. A sword was precious. You did not waste it on chaos. You used it when the outcome mattered, when witnesses were watching, when stories would follow. And the stories always followed. What followed was quieter and worse. The seax does not appear in legends. It is too plain. A long knife, sometimes short as a hand, sometimes nearly a short sword. It lived at the hip, not for battle, for everything else. Food, wood, rope, flesh. This was the weapon you never saw coming. The one used when rules broke down, when shields were tangled, when someone fell and the fight moved closer than anyone planned. It did not announce itself. It simply ended things. The seax tells you something uncomfortable. That survival mattered more than honor. That a culture you imagine as proud and loud relied on tools that worked in silence. And silence mattered. Viking shields were not passive. They were weapons made of wood and patience. They hid movement. They stole sight. A shield wall did not crush. It erased. It pressed you back until you could not tell who was pushing and who was falling. Behind the shields, nothing dramatic happened. Just pressure. Breathing became shallow. Space disappeared. And then someone lost balance. The shield did not need to strike. It only needed to deny. But this wasn't the worst part. Because the Vikings understood fear at a distance, they used bows. Not as a duel, as a message. An arrow did not challenge you. It interrupted you. It forced you to look away from what mattered. An arrow could come from nowhere, from a ridge, from a tree line, from a ship you thought was empty. You could not answer it. You could only endure it. and endurance has limits. Archery was not about skill. It was about timing, about shooting when the enemy was already tired, already distracted, already doubting, and doubt spreads. The weapons were not separate. They were layered. Spears to hold you, shields to press you, arrows to break your focus, blades to finish what hesitation started. Nothing rushed, nothing wasted. This is why the axe became the symbol. It is simple, it is loud, it makes a clean picture, but it hides the system. And systems are harder to fight than men. Most axes used were tools first. For wood, for work. They were light, fast, adaptable. Not the oversized weapons of fantasy. And when they were raised, it meant the plan had already worked. The axe was the final sound, not the first. And this is where the myth becomes dangerous. We imagine Vikings as chaotic, as driven by rage, as losing themselves in battle. But their weapons tell a different story, one of control, of preparation, of understanding how people break when they are tired, hungry, and uncertain. A raid was not about killing. It was about arrival, about appearing where you should not be, with tools already chosen for the place you stood, a spear for the doorway, a shield for the street, a blade for the corner where someone thought they were safe. Fear was not an accident. It was the point. Weapons were also law. A man's right to carry them marked his place. To be disarmed was to be erased. To have your weapon taken was worse than losing land. It meant you no longer mattered in the eyes of others. And when weapons were buried with the dead, it was not decoration. It was insurance. A belief that whatever came next would demand the same tools, the same readiness. Even silence had enemies. The final truth is slower to accept. Viking weapons were not about violence. They were about certainty, about removing choice. When you faced them, options narrowed, paths closed, time compressed. You did not fight a man. You fought his reach, his distance, his preparation, his refusal to hurry. And when it was over, there was no victory cry. Just tools being cleaned, points being checked, edges being wrapped, because tomorrow required them again. The axe was never the story. It was the distraction. The real weapon was the understanding that fear does not need spectacle. It only needs pressure, applied long enough. And once that pressure starts, it rarely stops where you expect.